Good morning, folks. Welcome to the second part of the John Casey series on his book, Upheaval. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, Saturday, December 9th, 11:42 a.m. Bringing you an update on the book released by John Casey and others from the Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center out of Orlando, Florida. And there's John Casey. We're looking at him. He's recovering now from a stroke. Upheaval's premise is that catastrophic earthquakes will destroy the United States in the next 20 years. And that doesn't leave out the rest of the world either. So let's just right into the update. What you're looking at is the earthquake hazard map. This is the USGS map showing the intensity of potential earthquakes and ground shaking that has a 2% chance of occurring within 50 years, according to the USGS. Now, the problem with this number is it doesn't make anyone worry. Who would care about a 2% chance of an earthquake happening in 50 years? No one. And the reason is that that statistic is given incorrectly. Now, since 2010, the Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center has published research papers on climate and seismology. And they have written letters to the U.S. government and governments around the world. These letters attempted to convince leaders of the U.S. of the need to prepare the country for catastrophic earthquakes expected to strike during the next solar hibernation or grand minimum, which starts now. Around 2014, and after many communications with the government, they began to see a positive change in the attitude towards earthquake risks facing the country. Previous studies by the USGS had provided a threat assessment that was tepid at best and likely confusing to the public in terms of whether they should be more or less concerned about the earthquakes. And that's the 2% chance of earthquakes occurring within 50 years. Fortunately, recent studies by the USGS are now more closely aligned with what we have been saying for years. The best yet official vision of the earthquake risk across the continuous U.S. from the perspectives of these authors has been published in a 2015 paper, which provides an important update to the earthquake threat. Despite the thoroughness of the recent studies, in some instances, realistic risk assessments, they still went far short of making the case for what the IEVPC is saying. Now, here's the facts, folks. A large portion of the population of the U.S. lives in areas vulnerable to earthquake hazards. You're looking at the map. This video is going to quantify the population and infrastructure exposure in these places within the conterminous U.S. that are subjected to varying levels of earthquake ground motions by systematically analyzing the last 4 cycles of the U.S. Geologic Survey's National Seismic Hazards Models. They were published in 96, 2002, 2008, and 2014. Now, using the 2013 land scan data, John Casey estimates the number of people who are exposed to potentially damaging ground motions are at least 28 million. And 57 million may experience some type of shaking at a moderate frequency within their lifetime. Now, here's the brass facts, folks. 2% of you may experience an earthquake within 50 years on this map, but that's the whole U.S., and that's how they obfuscate the truth. The reality is there is a 72% chance of one or more 6.7 earthquakes striking California in the next 20 years. A 72% probability. Now, does that make you raise an eyebrow? More than 143 million Americans are living in the 48 contiguous states are exposed to potentially damaging ground shaking from earthquakes. When the people living in earthquake-prone areas of Alaska, Hawaii, and U.S. are added, this number rises to half of all Americans are at risk to what is coming. The new exposure estimates is nearly double the previous 2006 estimates from the USGS, and it's attributed to both population growth and advances in science. The USGS Senior Science Advisor for Earthquake and Geologic Hazards and co-authors of the study states that populations have grown significantly in areas prone to earthquakes, and scientists have improved data and methodologies to allow for a more immediate awareness of this shaking. Now, let me go over the list of warnings sent out to the government since 2010. In March 2nd, the Space and Science Research Center issued a report to the Associated Press. The report is published on the internet for the widest possible distribution. It is correlation of solar activity, minimums, and large magnitude geophysical events. A paper was published in 2010 then called Earthquakes and Solar Activity Cycles. March 14th, 2011, the SSRC issued a press release warning that there will be more and large earthquakes that will strike Japan in 2011, which came true. A paper issued by Dr. Choi and Tusonda validated the previous paper. In fall 2011, Cold Sun came out. September 13th, 23, the SSRC published a commentary titled Earthquake, Volcanic Activities, and Solar Cycles. In March of 2014, a paper authored by Dr. Choi, Maslova, and Tusona and Casey was published, summarizing the following conclusions. The increasing seismic activity since 1990 is expected to continue for the coming 3 decades. We have entered a solar hibernation or possibly mini ice age, which will likely bring more strong, catastrophic earthquakes globally. April 2014, the president is notified for the final time to prepare the nation for the coming solar hibernation and geophysical events. June 2014, Humanics Books published an update on Cold Sun and Dark Winter, which also covered the correlation between record earthquakes and volcanic eruptions during grand minimums. August 25th, 2014, the International Earthquake Volcano Prediction Center posts and distributes a press release titled, California Enters the Greatest Earthquake Risk Period Ever. 2014 to 15, hundreds of radio and Newsmax TV interviews and public presentations were conducted by Casey. By early August 2015, the book Dark Winter became a #1 best-selling book. June 5th, the SSRC sends a letter to FEMA warning them that the United States will enter its highest risk period for catastrophic earthquakes between 2017 and 2038. In June 2015, numerous mainstream media outlets, prominent state newspapers in high-risk quake zones were notified via email by this group using the FEMA letter and the threat of catastrophic earthquakes. In June 2015, the SSRC notified each applicable governor's office of the increased threat of record quakes and volcanic eruption vis-a-vis the FEMA Administrator Fugate letter. All West Coast states and central Mississippi states and South Carolina were notified. In September 2015, Newsmax, a parent company of Humanics, begins on-air TV documentary about Dark Winter. May 13th, 2016, a follow-up letter and additional warnings was sent to the FEMA administrator from Veritance Corporation, indicating the June 5th, 2015 letter should be taken more seriously in view of recent geophysical activity, and the warning issued by Dr. Thomas Jordan at the Southern California Earthquake Center on May 4th, 2016. 2016, a second mailing was sent out to the governors of the U.S., most likely to suffer the brunt of these geophysical disasters. And in the summer of 2016, the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center posts and distributes its first press release of the year. Federal and state leaders are warned to prepare for catastrophic earthquakes and volcanoes. This release, as indicated in text, represents the final warning to governments after years of prior warnings to get their states and federal agencies to immediately prepare for catastrophic quakes that will strike any time in the future, but definitely between 2017 and 2038. Everyone has been warned. And the science is in. Now, guys, the correlation between solar and seismic activity is obvious. I'm going to leave you this paper. If we come down to the introduction, you start with the largest eruptions on the planet. Let's start with Vesuvius in 79 AD. If we come over to the GISP-2 numbers, this is 0. 79 AD is right here. This is during the fall of the Roman Empire and the highest cosmic ray flux during this grand solar minimum drop-off. That's when Mount Vesuvius erupted. In 856, there was an earthquake in northern Iran with 200,000 victims. In 856 was the next grand solar minimum. Two 400-year cycles later, boom. An earthquake kills 250,000 people during this cosmic ray flux and this drop off into this grand solar minimum here, which ended up in the European Dark Age. On September 30th of 1139, an earthquake near Gyanza killed another 250,000 people in 1139, which is during the drop-off here and this grand solar minimum when the Vikings died off. This is high cosmic ray flux and a drop-off into the grand solar minimum, which is right where we are. We're 3 for 3 on the largest, most catastrophic volcanoes and earthquakes. 1556, the Great Chinese Earthquake killed almost 1 million people. That would be more like 10 million today. And that's happening down here in the drop-off. 1556. Let's see where that is. 1556 is down here in this quick drop. So we have an event during this drop, and then another significant event killing 1 million more during this drop. You see a pattern? 1853, there was an eruption at Krakatoa between Sumatra and Java. We could just come over here. And it's right here during this middle minimum. Now, every time we have large grand minimums like these, Glassberg and Dalton, there's a smaller drop-off in the middle, like here and here. And this has to do with John's relational cycle, which we'll talk about. So here's the relational cycle that John Casey uncovered. It's a 206-year pattern of grand minima, and we're dropping by 2030 into the next grand minima. This will be the peak cool, probably starting in 2028 and lasting to 2035. This is going to be a very bad solar minimum, folks. But we still have 3 more years of this solar minimum, and we're just starting to get started here if you follow our channel. Now, there are so many types of cosmic forcing out there at so many scales. It's hard to actually unravel what these cycles are in a time frame where you'll understand it. But I will leave you links to this graph, which shows you we're in a glacial period. We currently live in an ice age. We didn't come out of the ice age, no matter what anyone tells you. There's no proof of that. We've been in an ice age for over 1 million years, and every 100,000 years there's a warming that lasts for a very short period. We are, in fact, in the longest warm period in any of these 100,000 year cycles, and the drop-off afterwards is very rapid, which causes the empire to fail. We're in an interstadial. This is the big one, folks. This is the super grand minimum. This isn't like the other grand minimums before. This is the interstadial. After 12,000 years of quiescence since the last sea level rise, what happens in the middle of the Great Cycle is the glaciation portion. So we're going to be moving into a Heinrich event, potentially, which will cause the planet to go into a deep glacial cycle for 10,000 more years. It won't happen in your lifetime, but we're going to witness the beginning of it. And we're going to witness the beginning of it is this major cold period from 2028 to 2035 at the end of cycle 25. We're going to have a primer and a taste of what's to come in the next 3 years during the minimum of cycle 24. And what that includes is major seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, and they're all correlated with high cosmic ray flux and grand minimums. You can do a quick Google search on solar activity. I don't know why that disappeared. But what you can see, I don't know why these are disappearing, is that there's a cyclic nature to our sun, where it has a resonance. And the videos I put up on the heartbeat of the sun and all of the modern cosmological papers on solar forcing are suggesting the next 30 to 300 years, we are going into a cooling phase based on the known data. This is coming from all different venues. And if you watched the Grand Solar Minimum primer I published, you understand what is coming. The facts are in. When we drop off and cosmic rays increase, there are major volcanic and geophysical events in the form of earthquakes that kill hundreds of thousands of people. And you're not being warned about it by the government because this is part of the plan. I'm not sick and twisted. I'm just making an honest assessment of the facts. We know that the correlation exists. John Casey and the Earthquake Volcano Prediction Center and his book Upheaval have warned tens of millions of people of the coming events. And are governments reacting to the capacity that they should? Definitely not. So you need to be informed. You need to get educated. You need to become aware. You need to become aware of your surroundings and where you're living. If you're in a danger zone, you need to prepare on what will happen during an earthquake, or you need to move to a safe area. Any of these green or blue areas are safe. So is the tan. Anything yellow or less, I would say, is a safe place to raise your family if you can get there. If not, there are ways to prepare for safety in the event of a catastrophe. If you're not right near a fault and it happens, you'll probably live if you don't get crushed. And then you have to realize that everything is going to be on fire and the insanity will take place. So you have to know how to react when a catastrophe happens, because you're going to be responsible for helping. First responders are only going to help a very small amount of these people. The general public is going to have to help its fellow man. The events coming forward are global and catastrophic, but you can prepare to survive and thrive in the times ahead. Stay away from major cities, move to a rural area, find a safe zone, build community, start growing food, start preparing for the future. Be safe, everybody.